Good evening. The Bothell Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, October 15th will come to order. All planning commissioners are present and accounted for except for Commissioners Cabe and Gastineau, who are absent and excused. Moving through our agenda at this point, are there any public comments? And we will take public comments related to our agenda on land use as well as the sub-area review. So for those of you here for that, we will permit time for those comments. But are there any comments other than that from the public? Seeing none, and we move to approval of minutes. At this point, we do not have any minutes to approve. We don't have any new business, I believe, at this point. And so we'll move forward right away with the continuation of what we have really been working on all year, which is the public hearing on the 2015 Periodic Plan and Code Update, which is really the strategic plan for our city. And there are a number of items that we have on that particular public hearing agenda at this point. And so we're going to move right ahead with what will now be our second review of the land use element. And there are a variety of elements in our periodic plan, and we're currently reviewing the land use element. So at this point, we will turn the agenda over to Mr. Gary Hassler, who I believe has a presentation on that particular item. Gary.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, Commissioners, and good evening, members of the public who are here. It's great to see them. I'll just make a very quick comment before I give you a very brief presentation. There's a lot on your agenda tonight, and we know that. We apologize for the size of the packet, but in order to try and catch up on the schedule a little bit, we think we can get you through 4 sub-areas tonight, or at least an initial review of 4 sub-area plans. So that's why we're bringing you those in addition to the land use. If you don't make it through all 4, don't fret. This is an attempt to try and catch up. Either way, I think we're good. But I just wanted to let you know that up front. I do have a very brief presentation, so I'll go to the podium. As Steve has already said, this is the 2015 Periodic Plan and Code Update, and the item in front of you at the moment is the land use element. You previously saw this element on September 3rd when we gave you a background, some background detail on it, and let you know what the issues were going to be. We're now going to start to get into those issues a little bit. Before we get started, I will say that one of the issues within the land use element, as you know, is the issue of transfer of development rights. And I think I mentioned to you on October 15th, when this meeting would have occurred initially, that on that date we wouldn't cover TDR issues, but we would wait for our consultant to come back with results of the Snohomish County analysis. Tonight is essentially that October 15th meeting, so the same format will hold. Tonight we won't talk about TDR. On the 29th, when you move the next public hearing to, we will have the consultants here for TDR, so we'll cover that item then. So tonight we'll be looking at everything in your packet in the land use element with the exception of that TDR. I've put up some placeholder introductory language in the land use element for TDR, and you've probably seen that. That's intended to be introductory placeholder language. It may change a little bit as we go through that item, but we'll get there on the 29th. I'll go to this first slide again very quickly, since we have some folks with us tonight who may not have been following the process all the way through. The Washington State Growth Management Act requires the periodic updating of local comprehensive plans and development regulations. And in 2011, the state legislature established deadlines for the next periodic update. In accordance with that schedule, our deadline for adoption of an updated plan and implementing regulations is June 30th, 2015. And as Steve mentioned earlier, we've been working on this plan and regulation update for most of this year already. The primary purpose of the 2015 Periodic Plan and Code Update is to ensure that local plans and regulations comply with all requirements of the Growth Management Act. And it's anticipated that Periodic Plan and Code Update will comprise the bulk of the Planning Commission's work for this year and the early part of 2015, and the bulk of the Council's land use items for the first half of 2015. The land use item is a required plan element under the Growth Management Act. And essentially, it is the element that is sort of the glue for everything else. It all sort of comes together in the land use element. The issues that the staff identified early on as part of the land use element include accommodation of a population capacity shortfall in the Snohomish County portion of the city based on Vision 2040 growth targets and the 2013 Snohomish County Buildable Lands Report. We went into this particular issue in detail on September 3rd, so I won't rehash all of that. But if you have questions, I'd be glad to try and respond to them. The second issue is the integration of transfer of development rights into the plan, and again, we'll talk about that issue on October 29th. Another issue is the proposed amendments to land use policy LUP4 to exclude from the calculations for net buildable area surface stormwater, retention, detention, and water quality facilities. Review of the element in consideration of a new GMA requirement to consider utilizing urban planning approaches that promote physical activity. I've inserted one proposed policy into the land use element policies to address that. It's a fairly generic policy, but I think it suffices for the requirements of the GMA language. If the Commission would like to see more in there, we'd certainly be glad to work on that for you. And then related to the above new requirement, to the promotion of physical activity requirement, inclusion of 2 policies and 2 actions from the community services element, which is proposed to be deleted from the plan. And then finally, review of Bothell Municipal Code 1206-140B9, which permits up to 8 unrelated persons to occupy a single-family dwelling. In your packet, I've given you a table that shows what other jurisdictions are doing on this issue. Essentially, the number ranges from 5 to 8, with 8 being the most common number. In your staff memorandum in your packet, there's a space missing under Snohomish County, and if my memory serves correctly, they permit up to 6 persons. So you can fill in that blank in your table. I apologize for that. I'm going to go ahead and, the other revisions proposed in the element are fairly general, and that's updated the background and analysis section to reflect the 2012 and 2014 annexations, including annexation of all 9 designated potential annexation areas in the King County portion of the planning area. And then update of the growth targets and capacity section of the element to reflect the Snohomish County Buildable Lands Report and the 2014 King County Buildable Lands Report. We're proposing to attach both of those reports as appendices to the plan. So you'll see in the land use element that a lot of the old information regarding capacity analysis has been stricken, and there's a much smaller section in there that talks about the growth targets that we have today, and the bulk of the information will be provided in those 2 appendices. We'll append the entire buildable lands reports from both counties. And then minor revisions to update text throughout the element. And I'm going to stop it there. I have the rest of my presentation for September 3rd if we need to revisit it with all of the detail on all of those things. But I'll go back to the table and be glad to answer any questions you might have at this point. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Gary. And I think that for the record and for those who are here from the public here today, I'd like to make a couple of comments. I'd be very interested in any of the other comments from the other commissioners, and that is that when we talk about the use of land in the city of Bothell, it's a very important topic, obviously. It's one of the most important things we on the Planning Commission do. And as Gary mentioned, we have the Growth Management Act, which is a state law that we have to look at. We also have, because Bothell spans 2 counties, Snohomish and King County, we have to look at county requirements, and this Vision 2040 is one of the county plans. It's their strategic plan, of which Bothell is a part of, that we have to look at. But in addition to both state and county regulations that we are reviewing, I think it's really important that we're looking at the aspirations of the citizens of Bothell ourselves and what our values are. And I can tell you, speaking personally, and I'd love to hear from the other planning commissioners, that we really do want to take all of that into account, both the state and county requirements as well as what we as citizens aspire for our city. So I just wanted to make those comments so that the members of the public that are here kind of realize that. There are some specific issues that we're looking at. Transfer of development rights, that was TDR he mentioned. And there's a lot of, as you can imagine, whether it's zoning changes or any other type of land use requirements and opportunities, a number of things that we're looking at. And so we have to both get through it as well as pay attention to this very important topic. I don't know if there's any other comments that any of the other commissioners would like to make. Okay. At this point, I think what I'd like to do is say, open this up to the public, and I don't know how well you're prepared to come and give any comments, but if there are any specifically on the land use element of our strategic plan, I'd like to give you an opportunity to come forward and introduce yourself and present any comments or information that you'd like to. Yes, ma'am. If you could just give us your name and address for the record.
Okay.
And the only thing that we would ask is try to limit your comments to around 5 minutes.
Let's go for 3.
Okay.
My name is Joanne Harkonnen. I live at 18516 94th Avenue Northeast in Bothell. I've lived there since 1962. And let's see, you asked me to tell you one.
Just name and address.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
I noticed in the recommendations of staff that they're not requesting or asking for any change in the issue as it relates to the number of unrelated persons that can occupy a home in a single-family area. And I'd like more consideration to be given to examining that a little bit further, because I think it's kind of a slippery slope to go down. If in the proposed code update, LUG3 said that it's to create a vibrant, sustainable, family-oriented community through balances of land for housing, commercial industry, and so forth. And in addition to the towns that were mentioned by staff, I went online and looked or called some other municipalities in our area to see what was allowed in their municipal codes. And I found that in Mill Creek, the single-family zones have to have 5 or fewer unrelated people. In Briar, single-family areas, 4 unrelated. In Woodinville, they tell me that they don't permit that in single-family zones. They do allow dormitories, but they have to be permitted only as an accessory to a school. And in Linwood, family is defined as not more than 5 unrelated persons. And so I guess that I appreciate everyone looking at this, but I think that in our area it would be fairly safe to say that less than half of the people who live in such zones in our town are even aware of this issue in our zoning. And I think that most of them, like myself, would not become aware of it until something in your neighborhood popped up where rooms were being rented. And while I have no disagreement or no problems with the persons, I think in an area that's devoted to single families that it's a poor precedent to establish. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question for you, if you don't mind. So I really appreciate your thoughtful comments. Personally, and I'd love to hear from others on the commission, I've been looking at this very closely myself, not only for what is the right number, right, but also the issues around parking, around just the impact of what we're trying to achieve in a neighborhood, and yet how this potentially alters that. We also have, as I mentioned, a lot of different things. We are being asked to provide greater density of population, so we have to look at that as well. We have
Seems like we have.
We have
quite
a four-year university in our city, and we have college students. And so in many cases, these would make terrific roommates in a house, but I very much appreciate your comments. And let me just ask you, and some of the other commissioners might have a question for you. So if you could wave your magic wand, and if I'm going to guess, based on the other examples of Linwood, Mill Creek, Briar, and others, that you're thinking somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 or 5 rather than 8. Am I correct?
Yes, something less than 8,
Okay.
I guess I would say.
All right. Any questions or comments from the other commissioners?
Yes.
Mr. Stedman.
First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I really appreciate it. It was clear, concise, and to the point, and that was well done. Have you experienced a problem or seen an issue with in your own neighborhood where there are 8 or more unrelated individuals in a home?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's a letter to that regard someplace in your packet. From some time ago, I looked at the date, and I think the first inquiry that I made was about a year ago. And so back someplace. There's not... The house has been remodeled, and I have no complaints about the persons. There's not been disruption in the area in this particular issue. Parking is an issue, but just looking at that possibility, if you don't recognize it until after it happens, it's too late to do anything about it because it's permitted. Right. And so I just think it needs to be more closely looked at.
Thank you.
Any other? Commissioner Clark?
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Harkin. I appreciate your comments, too. Is there a specific reason why, and I apologize, I don't have the letter or
That's
remember it
okay.
at this point, but are there specific issues that you have, such as parking or noise or something that is of a bigger concern to you than others?
Currently, I guess the parking is the biggest immediate issue for me, but we've lived here since 1962 and raised our family here, and it's been pretty much, we have a modest home on West Hill and a neighborhood where families have been, there have been a lot of families that we've seen come from, very small to grown and gone, and it's just a real change that perhaps as my hair gets grayer, I have to get used to. But I think we need to be cautious about the needs of families if we're going to still try and keep this a vibrant single-family community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Lee?
And thank you very much for your comments. I really appreciated them. I'm kind of the rookie to this commission, so I haven't been here long, but I know that came up in my neighborhood just within the past 2 months. There was a house about 9 houses from me where they thought the owner was living north, and they thought they had 3 people living there, and it turned out they had 8. And thankfully, the people moved back to their home here. So I don't know if the neighbors were just real nice and never brought it to the city, but I also see here that the code enforcement officer has stated hasn't really been an issue, but I think I would agree with Graham's comments about 8 seeming a little bit on the high side.
Commissioner Stahl.
Yeah, this issue is particularly interesting to me because I used to be on my homeowners board, and so I was on the other side of the fence where this came up. We had received homeowner complaints about house with I think it was eight people, and they were nice people, but there were just implications to having that many unrelated people. There were traffic implications. Parking was a problem. It attracts renters, which can change the character of a single-family neighborhood. So, although they were nice people, there were consequences to having that many unrelated people in the house. And we had people within our homeowners association come, and they complained to the homeowners board first, because that's their neighbors, that's where they started. And on the homeowner side, we talked to the city, and we talked to, I think it was Debbie at Code Enforcement, and what we found there was that really there was nothing, there was no other part of Code Enforcement that could solve the problem. that they were complying with the BMCs, and there wasn't any other part of code enforcement to deal with the parking issues or the noise issues or things like that. And that was one of the things I wondered when I looked at the list of the other cities, that even the ones that have a higher number or that have 8, perhaps there was some other piece of the code that helped compensate for that number. It wasn't a huge problem, but I mean, I would be in favor of lowering the number to where some of our neighbors are at. Linwood, Mill Creek, Kirkland all have 5, and that seems to work for them.
Thank you. So I very much appreciate it. As you can tell, we're listening to you. And I guess what I'd provide just in terms of some guidance for staff, I'd like to, I think you can tell from the commissioners as well as from the public that we've heard that we would like to look at this more. So do go back and look at some of these other municipalities that are close to us.
Things that I read, and as you know, reading codes is not.
Yeah, so we'll do the homework, and that's what staff is good at. And so we'll do our homework to see these neighboring municipalities and come back to us with some data and some recommendations, and we'll go from there. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public on the land use element, any portion of it that would like to speak at this time?
No, this is appropriate time.
This is appropriate time?
Yes.
Please, again, introduce yourself, give us your name and address, and if you would limit your comments to 5 minutes.
I'll do that. I have a handout I can offer the commission.
You bet. I'll pass them around.
Yeah, we can certainly ask for that. I've just-
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you all tonight. My
just-
name is,
Yeah, it's Mike Harmon,
Mike Harmon.
and your address?
I'm not a citizen of the city of Bothell. My business address is 2829 Rucker Avenue, Everett, Washington. Coast Equity Partners is the name of the company. I am a resident of the city of Seattle.
Okay.
Coast Equity Partners is an affiliated company with a parent company called Coast Real Estate Services. We have 4 loosely affiliated companies. First is Coast Sperry Van Ness. Coast Sperry Van Ness is a full-service real estate brokerage. Commissioner Stedman is a senior advisor at CSVN. Second business is commercial property management. That's a construction services business. Third would be Coast Real Estate Services, full-service property management company doing business in a 5-state area. Most of the business headquartered here in Puget Sound area. Headquarters is Bothell. Headquarters is Everett. And then Coast Equity Partners, my company, which is a real estate investment company. Coast Equity Partners has invested in the city of Bothell. We have holdings that I'll be addressing specifically tonight, as well as a more recent holding, Lot L in your Bothell Landing, which we're big fans of. Lot L is immediately north of the Six Oaks development, which is one of the first to come out of the ground in that development. Real proud of what's happening in the real pleased to see what's happening in the city of Bothell in regard to Bothell Landing and the good work that staff did to set this all up, and I'm sure the commission also participated in significantly to make it all happen. The reason for my opportunity to speak to you tonight is about this capacity planning that you're going through. I won't belabor the points. I know that we need about 3,500, a capacity for about 3,500 additional people in the city, specifically on the Snohomish County side. Report in 2013 identified a couple of ways to do that, either through providing for residential development in areas that aren't currently planned for residential, or changing zoning densities in current residential areas. I think in that report you identified 3 areas that could take that capacity: Canyon Park, Country Village, and Nike Hill. Canyon Park and Country Village would be adding residential designations. Nike Hill would be an upzone from its current density, which is R9600 for residential. Current thinking, as outlined in some of the documents that are in your agenda tonight, is that rezones can be problematic, both from a practical and political standpoint, and I'd like to talk specifically about those realities as it relates to Nike Hill. Nike Hill has been considered in your planning efforts as really just one parcel, that parcel being what we all might call the FEMA site at the corner of, almost at the corner of 228th and Meridian. But I think if you were to look at Nike Hill, what you really see is 5 contiguous undeveloped or underdeveloped parcels that total just a little over 117 acres. 91.63 acres are actually in the city limits today. The balance is in the county immediately adjacent to it. This tract of land represents a huge potential to affect the positive growth in the area, to take on that capacity, some of that capacity that you're looking to find in the city. I view it as an overlooked area in the northwest corner of the city that doesn't have many amenities, doesn't have many services, and the character of that area is actually already higher density residential than the R96 zone that the Nike Hill has, and so I don't think it would present as big a hurdle as one might think in terms of rezone. So Nike Hill, again, in this handout, I'm just elaborating that there are 5 parcels, 4 of which that are in the city limits. Again, you can see the totals: 91 acres in the city, 117.65 total. Those 5 parcels are largely undeveloped or underdeveloped. Wooded acreage. In the case of Nike, the FEMA site, cleared with little buildings on it, probably underutilized, obviously, to its current zoning, which is R9600. The parcel that's just outside of the city limits, I've marked that on your exhibit as parcel 5. That is that site has been excavated and since subsequently filled in and graded, and is prepped for development as multifamily. That's its current zoning. So this neighborhood around Nike Hill is actually a lot more higher density. It has a higher density zoning than maybe we might think. Again, this piece immediately to the west is multifamily. Everything else on the west edge of this boundary is higher density residential. I think it's county, but you could say that this is somewhere in the R5400s kind of range. Everything to the south is R8400. You've got condominium development to the north, probably done at about R2200. And then you're obviously bordered by 228th and Meridian to give you kind of nice buffers and separation from existing zoning, which is variable, but anywhere from 8400 on down, and a couple of pockets of 9600. So this area already is higher density than the R9600 that it currently has on these open tracks. You can see the zoning stuff on the next page. Understand the comp plan goals for this area calls out that Nike Hill be one of the 3 neighborhoods to handle retail and services clusters in the planning area. So this is an area where you're trying to already in your comp plan bring in some neighborhood services. So recognize that as a reality. This is also an area in your comp plan which you've identified is in great need of open space and active parks. You currently don't have that sort of opportunity available to the public in this area, and so it's been expressed in the comp plan that you find a way to get active parks and open space here. So those are some of the goals that I see for the area that you're all trying to shape from the planning department. The area also has a lot of tremendous benefits if you're thinking about it in terms of higher density, its ability to take on higher density. There's already a school adjacent to this area. Shelton View Middle School is right there, adjacent to this block of open land. This area is serviced primarily by Locust Way and Meridian, as opposed to carrying traffic over to the 527 corridor, which already has significant capacity problems and frequent congestion. So this is a way to bring some density into an area of your city that has some different arterials in use than 527 and the other proposed sites. the goal, as I see it, is to take this density issue that you have, this capacity issue that you have, and try to spread it around a bit in the Snohomish County part of the city. The other two sites that you identified are both on the 527 corridor. This one, although it's currently not in, it seems from the notes that it's currently not one you'd like to recommend going forward. It gives you an opportunity to take some of that capacity and move it into a different part of the city off that main corridor. And I would encourage you to consider that as a strong reason why you might take a look at moving some capacity that direction. There are a lot of comments in the documents that you have as part of your agenda that talks about vacant land development. This is one of those remarkable areas of your city where you have over 100 acres of undeveloped land that could be shaped in a more imaginative way than our 9600 zoning, which is just going to mean maximum use of the land for large lot, single-family homes, which really isn't, I think, in character with what the city's hoping for, in the master plan, nor is it really what's desired in terms of the citizens of Bothell and those that would plan to move here. Nonetheless, vacant land development is going to happen there under our 9600. Land prices are rising dramatically post-recession, basically have recovered or exceeded where we were post-recession. Land development is coming, and under the current zone, that means our 9600, which means reshaping of that land, bringing down a lot of the forestation that's there and opening that up to large lot homes. So I don't think we can ignore the reality that that's where we're headed. And again, some rezoning in this area might give you an opportunity to reshape that neighborhood, change the density, but also preserve open space, create active parks, create mixed-use living in that area where you have a mix of single-family, multifamily, a blend of things that all are in character with some retail amenities that area is already being called for. I think what I'm asking for tonight is for you to not set aside Nike Hill. It looks like in your notes that it's sort of quickly been dismissed as not viable because of the political issues that are surrounding rezoning, as opposed to adding residential development to existing zones, commercial zones. And so I'd like to encourage the commission to consider making a motion to continue studying Nike Hill as a viable place to take some of this capacity, to not consider Nike Hill as just one site, FEMA, which is a 40-acre tract, but really the almost 100 acres that you have in your city that are underdeveloped right in that, right adjacent to it. When you look at it in that context, I think you have an opportunity for an absolutely wonderful development that would be a neighborhood center, if you will. I've been thinking about it a while, and I think the best thing I can relate to you all that we might be able to imagine in our minds is a neighborhood version of a Mill Creek Town Center. You're going to need, services there. You can attract businesses into that area. You can have a mix of housing, single family, multifamily. You can have, there's already condominium development there. So this would be an active area of your city. You can take a lot of these open tracts, put smaller, higher density development in them, and leave open space. You can convert some of that open space to active parks. And in the end, that 100 acres is going to be much more utilized, much more well utilized than it will as our 9600. So my ask of the commission is to please consider Nike Hill. Keep planning, keep thinking about it, keep your planning going to see if this whole area is a viable place to take some of this capacity. I think it's wonderful that Canyon Park and Country Village are in consideration. I would think that you would do well by the city to also consider Nike Hill and its potential, because there's 100 acres there that otherwise is going to be our 9,600 homes.
Thank you very much. Before you leave the podium, are there any questions of Mr. Harmon from the Planning Commission?
Not necessarily a question, but just for full disclosure, I don't work directly with Mike Harmon, but we're in the same office, and I actually was the broker that brought the deal to them, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So
Okay. We've owned this property for quite a long time.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Any comments to what we just heard?
I have
Commissioner
a
Clark.
question for staff. Could you refresh us on, I believe the reason why you elected not to include this area was because we thought we could make up the population shortfall in the other areas. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the main reason. We can make up the growth target population shortfall just within Canyon Park. And it seemed to us that Canyon Park is certainly a good candidate for adding mixed use, residential. Country Village is likely not going to be Country Village for much longer anyway. The property owners have been trying to sell that property for some time. So it seemed to us that was a pretty natural candidate for redesignation anyway. And it's located on 527, so it provides some sort of activity center between Canyon Park and then downtown. The FEMA site, which is what we had originally proposed or were originally studying as staff, it was literally just the FEMA property plus the small piece of NB across 228, which I think is about 53 acres or so. We originally thought that we might need that as well to accommodate the population shortfall, but once we ran the capacity numbers, it became clear that we could actually accommodate all of the Vision 2040 growth target within just the Canyon Park area. So the FEMA site at that point seemed less likely potentially to redevelop in the time frame of the Vision 2040 growth targets. Plus, we felt that there would potentially be a little more political difficulty with redesignating that site, since it is the FEMA site presently. So for that reason, and again, mainly because the capacity shortfall could be accommodated in Canyon Park, we decided to recommend taking that one off the table.
Could I throw
Yeah,
one more
comment?
thing there? Mr. Harmon, did you by any chance submit a comprehensive plan amendment request for this particular parcel as part of this year's consideration?
We have not. The parcel that we own in isolation, I don't believe is we haven't taken action there. I think considering the broader area, the 4 parcels that are contiguous there.
Excuse me, if you're going to ask him questions, he needs to return to the podium.
sorry about that.
So,
Sorry about that. So no, we have not made application for that, but in the context of the 90-plus acres that are there in the city today, I think that's really more a planning commission and planning department function to say, is this an area that we ought to consider looking at to reshape its future, provide some capacity relief for other areas, but to consider it more than just the FEMA site. Remember, DNR owns the strip that's out on Meridian at the southeast corner of 228th. Parks, but I think it's also DNR owns a very large tract south of there, contiguous to all this area that I'm talking about. And prior to the recession, we were in contact with DNR about purchasing that land through a swap mechanism where they were desiring income-producing property in exchange for what they viewed as low productive, isolated land tract in the city of Bothell. So that tract is likely going to sell. A developer, will come in. Our 9600 is not a particularly attractive zone for that type of property, but it will transact. So this area is going to get developed, and I think that's why in the context of your planning processes, if you look at the larger, I'll keep using a 100-acre reference, rather than just FEMA, I think you'll see an opportunity to do something much more interesting in that portion of your city and meet some great planning goals as well as this capacity issue.
thank you.
So
Any other questions?
Could I add one more thing? So the reason I asked that question was that we don't know right now how the commission or the staff might react to your presentation tonight, which I think was great, but you do have the ability to submit for a comprehensive plan amendment that isn't just specific to your property in the future. It would be too late to do that this year, I'm quite certain, but you do have the ability to do that in the future. that would be more comprehensive than just your property. So you might want to look into that and consider that in the future.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Stahl.
Yes, this is probably a pretty naive one, but are these pursuits mutually exclusive between Canyon Park and Nike Hill, or is it feasible to do both and just let the market decide which one turns out to be more attractive to develop?
They're not mutually exclusive. It's obviously possible to do any or all of them. We tried to present a recommendation as staff that we felt made the most sense given the growth targets that we have to accommodate and what might be most palatable both to the community and the City Council, as well as staff.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I would like to just add a few comments, and that is that I think we do need to look, obviously, at the increased residential capacity that we're being asked to account for in Snohomish County, as well as employment. I know that also our 9,600 lots are kind of a dying breed, and we want to be able, if we have the opportunity to have some more R90, good-sized lots in Bothell, that we don't want to miss that opportunity. But I also know that in that particular part of our city, the northwest part of Bothell, folks are, for the most part, there's this one corner zone neighborhood business, as Gary alluded to, that has a couple of services there, but most of the time they're coming down the hill into Canyon Park to do what they need to do, and it's a hot button with me. With this idea of, so it's not just to plan for capacities, but also to push out services into our neighborhoods. It's healthy, I believe. It gives people more options, less travel, saves time, good business opportunities, job opportunities. I see good things all over for that. And so I would like to see the staff take a closer look at this. Right now, for example, this zoning of NB, can we also add this particular zoning of RAC, Residential Activity Center? I think provides a lot of flexibility for, again, housing density as well as interesting new development, and I think we really want to look at that. I think it's a good thing for our city. So I would entertain a motion for us to, as is being requested, to keep what is being called here the Nike Hill area, but the area noted in this particular presentation in the plan, and give us a potential additional area of flexibility going forward. So if there's someone who would like to present that motion, I'm open to that.
I'll try. I would like to make a motion that we keep the FEMA/Nike Hill site in consideration for, not sure how to phrase that.
Just in consideration for additional development and zoning flexibility. As of right now in our plan, we've shut that off. So keeping it in our strategic plan.
Keeping it in the strategic plan.
I'll second that.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Are there any other public comments for the land use element? Hearing none, thank you very much for the members of the public who spoke up. Let's now look at the material that was in our packet around the land use element, and as Mr. Hassler suggested, it's a fairly formidable amount of material. And we are going to have another review of this, let's say, at our next meeting. So, Gary, what would you suggest that would be a good use of our time this evening, to knowing that we have a number of other items on our agenda around sub-area plans? So let's say if we were going to take another 10 minutes or so on this, what would be a good use of our time on the land use element?
Well, I think it would be very helpful to us if you have any specific comments about the material in the land use element that has been proposed to be stricken, or more particularly, new material that's in there, Most of it has to do with the background material and the capacity information. There are a couple changes in the policies, but they're not terribly extensive, with the exception of LUP4. That's a small change, but it's a significant change. It's not just a textual change. So I would say if you have any specific comments regarding anything that we've proposed in the revisions, that would be good for us to know.
I think that's a great way to
And this
approach
will certainly come back to you on the 29th. I think on the 29th we'll probably be focusing mostly on TDR, but this will certainly come back to you beyond the 29th as well. So there will be other opportunities to go back through this material.
Okay. So what I'd like to ask of the commissioners is, let's make the assumption that we've read this material, and that we're this evening going to ask any specific questions on any particular part of it. I have several, but before I ask mine, I'm going to ask my fellow commissioners if any of them have any questions or comments with regards to the land use element of the plan. Seeing heads down, I'm going to proceed with mine. And then I'll give the opportunity when I'm done if there are any other questions. So I had a couple of specific questions. So on page 2, one of the background elements that you mentioned is the net effect of changing the calculation for net buildable area of surface and stormwater retention. And so just a real specific question of, if we're going to take stormwater retention and just kind of this overall water management part out of our calculation, what is the net effect of that?
The net effect is that obviously those areas would then be counted towards density calculations. Stormwater and other water facilities that are included in those calculations right now are probably not a massive amount of the site. I think and Bruce can probably jump in here. He probably knows the numbers better than I do, but in most cases they're probably anywhere from 10 to 20% of the site total, and 20 would be at the outside end. What's happening is, as low-impact development techniques become more prevalent and required by the city, those facilities are by nature becoming larger and larger. So our thought was that it's starting to make sense to allow density credit for those areas as they take up more and more of a building site.
Okay, thank you. I noticed in the section of the Bothell planning area that, and this is not new to me, but I'd like to just have it clarified for the record, that the planning area that we're looking at in terms of our land use policies really extend beyond the city limits of Bothell, but they actually look at future potential annex areas, particularly in Snohomish County. In King County, that's one of the changes that's happened in the last 8 to 10 years, is that we've annexed most of the areas that were outside of the Bothell city limits that are now in the city limits. So I think that's an important point to recognize, that we're making plans not only for for land that is inside the city limits of Bothell, but potentially in the city limits in the next 10 years. So I just want to make that comment if my fellow commissioners hadn't really noted that. I did see all of the material that you're recommending being stricken from the plan in terms of all of these specifics. I support that, and having that material in a form of an appendix, I'm very supportive of that. Let's see, I had one other question. Under goals, and this is now moving forward actually in the particular section, LU 27. So now we're moving into land use goals, policies, and actions. Goal number 1 is to delineate through collaborative interjurisdictional processes in King and Snohomish County's urban growth areas sufficient to permit the urban growth projected to occur. I like that goal. I like it as written, but I zeroing in on the idea of collaboration. And we've talked about the Growth Management Act. We've talked about the county plans, strategic plans that we have to take into account for. I just want to ask staff that when I just listed a few other actors, let's say, in the city of Bothell. I'm thinking of the education actors, not only the North Shore School District, but we have private schools, we have the University of Washington, we have a community college, they're having their own plans and their own strategic direction and their own investments. So my question for staff is, to what extent are we truly collaborating with these actors, so not just the county, but also these other investors and players in our city, to coordinate the direction of our city with them?
Well, I guess I'll break your comment and question up into two parts. First of all, LUG-1 is really a goal that is geared towards the whole issue of accommodating the growth targets, which is one of the big issues that we're talking about in the land use element. And that's a process that we do go through extensively with the counties to come up with the allocations. The second part that gets more to your question, I think, is we take into account what the school district and other special districts are doing, particularly in the utilities and transportation element. Certainly, with regards to utilities and transportation in particular, we have to coordinate and their plans with ours. So that's really where the bulk of that coordination with those other special districts occurs.
Yeah, and on that topic, specifically around the school district, we have the new high school that is going to be built and actually being worked on right now. I believe that is not in the city limits of Bothell, but is that in the planning area of Bothell? So I see heads nodding.
It is not
in our planning area.
Yeah, I believe it's just outside.
But there's no doubt that whether it's the city limits of Bothell or the planning area of Bothell, it's going to be impacted by that high school in terms of additional demands for services as well as opportunities for education. So I guess I just would like to have some assurance that there really is coordination going on as we look at the different, as I mentioned, actors in our city, and we're planning accordingly.
We do review their plans. We receive their plans and are asked to comment on them. So to the extent that we are able to, we do that.
Great. Thank you. Not any other questions or comments? I don't see any. And so I think at this point we're ready to conclude with the second review of the land use element. Are there any specific questions that staff has of us today that you would like to have us address?
Well, I certainly received feedback from you on two issues. One is that you would like us to take a closer look at the number of unrelated persons living in a single-family dwelling. That's a code amendment that goes along with this. And the second is to take a better look, a closer look at potentially redesignating area on what we're calling Nike Hill. So we'd be glad to look at both those issues.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can tell you that I've read the other staff comments and changes, and really beyond my questions, I'm supportive of the language that you've had in the plan. So just so you can have that guidance from us this evening.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So we're ready to move on in our agenda. And we've got 4 different sub-area plans that in our plan there's sub-areas, and Bothell is divided into, if you look at a map of Bothell, you'd see 17 different sub-neighborhoods, small neighborhoods that each of these neighborhoods, which we call sub-areas for planning purposes, have their own particular chapter and part of our plan. And we have to look at, just to kind of frame it up, just as we're looking at state and county initiatives for our overall city plan, we have city-wide goals that we want to implement that reflect the values and vision of Bothell going forward. But at the same time, we want to take into account those individual needs of those particular neighborhoods and sub-areas. And so we have to kind of walk that tightrope of both what are the overriding values and demands for services from the city in itself, as well as those unique requirements from that particular neighborhood or sub-area. So those are just my opening comments, and so Bruce Blackburn, take the agenda away at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commission members and members of the public. This is, of course, the initial Planning Commission public hearing on 4 of those sub-areas you just described: Bloomberg Hill, Brickyard Road, Queensgate, North Creek, Northeast 195th Street, and the West Hill sub-areas. And as you identified, there are 13 sub-areas. This is a map showing the sub-areas we're going to discuss tonight, from Bloomberg Hill, which formerly was known as Holly Hills, Pioneer Hills, Morningside sub-area. We changed that designation in 2010. North Creek, Northeast 195th Street, Brickyard Road, Queensgate, and West Hill. Now, as I
Just for the record, are there 17 sub-area plans or 13?
There are a total of 17 sub-area plans. What we're doing this round is there are 4 in the Muga area, basically our future growth areas into Snohomish County. We are not doing sub-area planning on those areas right now. What we're going to do is we're going to focus upon the areas that are within the city currently that we can actually kind of get our teeth into and do some of those provisions, because we are kind of pressed to get this periodic update reviewed.
Great.
So essentially tonight we're going to talk about 4 of them. And as you identified, the purpose of the sub-area plans is to regulate the use of land in a manner that recognizes the residential neighborhoods, some of the business areas within Bothell, and to identify a specific desired character for each of these sub-areas. Now, the sub-area plans refine the planning area-wide elements, basically like the transportation, the land use, and all those things. They have a little bit more detail in them that basically identify some of those character issues. As well as, of course, the sub-area plans is where we establish the land use designations for the piece of property. Now, staff is proposing we take a similar approach to the sub-area plans as we did with the planning area-wide elements, and that is to primarily keep it a generally periodic update, not to be a wholesale change to each of these sub-area plans. To remove some of the inconsistencies we've identified within each of them, to match some of the proposed Planning Commission preliminary approved elements. You've identified some changes in your elements, plan area-wide elements like the urban design and land use. We're starting to do that as well. And to basically change the figures or the maps. Right now we have 4 maps in there. We're proposing to go down to 2. Again, that's part of our kind of overall effort to try and reduce the scope of the comprehensive plan. Now, the city is not proposing changes to the existing land use designations or zoning classifications, with a couple notable exceptions as we identified tonight. One, of course, is in Canyon Park, and then the other is in Country Village, and, of course, with the addition of the Nike Hill provision tonight, so that'll be in one of the other provisions. However, individual property owners, basically owners of land, have and are likely to continue to approach the Planning Commission and propose changes to their land use designations. In fact, we have one request tonight that we're going to talk real briefly about, kind of introducing it. And of course, the property owner requests will have to be identified, analyzed, and notified. We've got some very specific notification provisions whenever we do one of these individual property rezone kind of things. That basically requires a 21-day hearing notice prior to the Planning Commission taking any formal action for their recommendations. So we got a little ways out on some of these provisions we've got right now. Now, the first area I'm going to talk about is Bloomberg Hill. It's about 298 acres, and it's predominantly single-family residential. The proposed changes, again, follow the housekeeping, recognition of the King County annexation, which just occurred in 2014, and some other amendments to reflect some of the provisions that the Planning Commission has talked about in our planning area-wide provisions. Staff does have one proposed change to this, and that involves a subdivision called Falcon View, which is basically in the southern part of the sub-area. And I apologize, this is not a great map, but I got a better one right here. And essentially what's happened is that through the course of the planning processes and when we actually have physical subdivisions put on a piece of property, in this case, there is a boundary line, zoning boundary line, that splits 4 of those houses. And basically what happened is this was something that was identified in just the normal course of our day-to-day operations, where somebody came into the counter and said, hey, I've got some questions about, I think it was actually one of these houses up a little bit north of there, and we pulled up the map and we said, oh, this is interesting, we've got this change here. So essentially what we're proposing is that we change the boundary to reflect this open space tract and to remove the split designation for those 4 houses and identify them as all R 5400D, which is 5,400 square feet, detached, basically single-family residential, and keep the commercial zoning, R2800 OP-NB, on this office complex that's down to the south. So that's one of the changes that staff is proposing, not necessarily property owners. Now,
Bruce,
I'm
before
sorry,
we
yes.
leave that,
Yes,
so
absolutely.
just a real quick question. So by changing that boundary, is that going to impact the future development potential of that, what is currently undeveloped, but is there any potential development change by doing that?
Actually, no. What happened is that when this went through the subdivision process, which is part of our state law provisions, and we actually create these on-the-ground lots, controls the uses for this piece of property, particularly through their conditions, covenants, and restrictions. This piece of property here is actually an open space slope tract that goes with the residential units up above, and partly with the commercial building down below. So essentially what happens is this kind of cleans up that boundary. We're not going to affect any potential development capabilities because they've already been developed to their, I don't usually choose the term highest and best use, but the use that's most logical for that property. And the subdivision, again, controls the use of that piece of property, which is detached single-family residential.
Great, thank you.
No problem. The other sub-area we're talking about tonight is Brickyard Road, Queensgate. Now, that's about an area of about 370 acres. And again, our staff proposed changes are primarily housekeeping amendments, recognizing the King County annexation, and some other amendments to affect some of the preliminary Planning Commission recommendations. However, this is one of the sub-areas we do have a property owner request, and it's basically regarding a property down here at the northwest quadrant of the intersection of 124th Avenue and Northeast 160th Street. It was just submitted last week. And basically, I went too fast there, sorry. Basically, the idea is that we're going to have to come back with that one at a later date with some more analysis for the Planning Commission. One of the other provisions that staff is proposing in this particular area is that right now we have an RAC OP-NB, kind of one of these neighborhood business centers right here. And there's an old action that was basically formulated in 1996 that talks about creating some special customized design standards for this area. We're proposing that we remove that action and just allow our citywide design standards, which are more than adequate in this case, to control that area. Now, this is a little bit better photo of the property owner request. And basically, you can see and outlined in the red dashed line are the properties in question that currently have an R5400D designation. Now, R5400D, again, means detached, 5,400 square feet of lot area for each individual single-family residential lot. This is some of the designations around it, primarily R7200, of course, a couple of schools, there's a water tank, and there is some more intense designations to the west, and maybe a little bit stuff to the north as well. One of the reasons that property owners have provided this is because that underneath their former King County zoning, it's their opinion that they could have achieved a greater number of lots or units than they can underneath their City of Bothell designation. And when we did the pre-annexation zoning for these areas, and we established the zoning for theirs, we tried to match King County zoning designations as much as we could. Basically, the idea is if it was an R6 King County, we assigned R7200. 5400 was an R8, et cetera, like that. However, there are some nuances between different jurisdictions, regulations, and there are situations where King County may get more lots within a certain zoning classification than the City of Bothell. And that's basically what the property owners have identified as to their purpose behind doing this. The request is to go from the R5400D to an R4000 designation, which is a attached multifamily, if you would, a designation at 4,000 square feet of net developable area per dwelling unit. So that's one of the requests we have coming in right now. The other sub-area is much simpler. It's the North Creek, Northeast 195th Street sub-area. It is a very large sub-area. It covers 885 acres. It is almost 10% of the area of the city. It's a very large one. The predominant land uses there, of course, is office and light industrial. This is where we have 3 individual business parks. They all looks like one, but it's all 3 individual business parks. And again, we're just proposing some very basic housekeeping amendments to this area. One of the things about this is that it is a major employment center for the city, as well as, of course, it's been recognized by the State Department of Commerce as a important contributor to the biomedical innovation zone. So that's one of the things that we have basically that we want to make sure we preserve in this sub-area. Finally, the last sub-area is the West Hills sub-area, again, a very large sub-area, basically on the west side of the community. And again, the predominant land use here is detached single-family residential. Now, there's a few attached residential and businesses in the southern part of the sub-area, which is basically right along 522. And, of course, there's a couple schools, there's a couple parks. This is also where the Magnolia Dairy Farm, basically the large open space area that we've now designated with an agricultural zoning classification. King County purchased the development rights for many years. It's always going to continue to be a farm there. We have, again, proposed very few changes to that sub-area. So I think at this point I'd like to turn it over to you and ask you questions and get some public comment.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bruce. A really great, concise overview of a lot of material. Really appreciate the way it was presented. And so I have some questions, but before I ask mine, does any from the Planning Commission? And let's go ahead and ask those questions. There will be an opportunity for the public to step forward as well. But Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions that are, I think, somewhat related, and I want to address the comprehensive plan amendment request in the Brickyard Road Queensgate sub-area plan with the, I'm not sure, Spitation, Nielsen, and O'Day. Bruce, did you say that when we annexed these areas that the goal was to kind of mimic the underlying zoning in King County, or is that a correct characterization?
That is a correct characterization, yes. When the city did the annexation, we tried to match as close as we could their zoning designations.
And so it sounds to me like the real difference that is popping up now is that there are differences in dimensional requirements and that sort of thing between the King County zoning and the Bothell zoning that are probably making it not work quite as well. Is that such as maybe lot circle diameter, setbacks, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, yes.
Okay. If the goal was to kind of mimic the zoning, is it possible in some of these areas where we did annex to do some sort of overlay or something that would relax some of those dimensional requirements? Has that been considered?
It's very difficult to assign individual standards to different locations with the same zoning classifications, i.e., okay, in this part of the city we have this standard that applies here, and in this part of the city we have this standard that would apply here, making it really difficult. It can be done, but the preference is they use the sub-areas to refine some of those overall provisions and maybe add some clarification here and there. It's not basically to say these are entirely new standards within this sub-area. That would make each sub-area plan would have to be 500 or 600 pages.
So I guess then the request, it sounds like, is to try to, or at least what they're saying is that they're trying to get it a little bit closer to more, they feel it'd be more comparable to the old King County zoning to go to a higher density. And I guess what I'd like to know is that something that staff agrees with? Because I kind of see their plight. It's difficult to, maybe not have all that much control over where you get annexed and then have all of a sudden your property value affected or your development potential affected and that kind of thing. So I'd be curious, and it doesn't have to happen tonight, but I'd like to hear kind of if that is true, if a upzone is kind of maybe even though it's a more dense zone, it's more mimicking what the underlying King County zoning was.
Yeah, and one of the things that we could do here is that perhaps they can achieve their vision by assigning an R5400A designation. The D requires that you do a subdivision, detached individual single-family lots, and that requires that you deduct certain things. Public right-of-way is one of them, and all those kind of things that occur. Perhaps if they went with an R5400A designation, they could do private rights-of-way, which can be counted toward lot area and those kind of things. So there's a lot of different nuances here and there that we can look at. Unfortunately, because this came in so late, we really haven't had a chance to sit down and actually analyze what the potential impacts, plus and minus, would be. But that would be one of the things we would certainly do when we have the next public hearing on these items.
Okay. So second question. In these sub-areas that have areas that were annexed recently. Has there been any thought given to, I've noticed in just kind of looking at the zoning, it kind of creates a kind of a bit of a little islands of different zoning all over the place. Has there been any thought put into changing the zoning of some of these annexed areas to better match the existing zoning around them? And that could involve either an up zone or a down zone. But, for example, if there's R5400 and an area's annexed that kind of mimicked R9600 and it's an island, is it possible to consider the possibility of doing of changing the zoning so that it creates a more uniform distribution, I guess, or a more uniform zone?
In theory, yes, but don't forget, one of the things that, in fact, we had a discussion about this tonight was the whole capacity analysis provision. And when we annexed those Keene County areas, we had to assure that we met the Keene County assigned population and employment capacities when we did the annexation zoning for these areas. So it's a pretty complex process. We went through a lot of public hearings on this and a lot of analysis. So there's a little bit of a danger to say, well, we'll just make a lot of wholesale changes here because we might be getting in trouble with our capacity numbers. However, in general, the idea would be that we could look at some of those locations, although I want to identify that we were pretty careful to try and match those Keene County provisions. And again, I don't know the details of the applicant's plans, and I don't know what things he has done or he hasn't done. So I'm really hesitant to say, yes, they're absolutely correct on that issue. But we can say that, in general, we do believe that there was a reduction in the number of dwelling units underneath the potential for Keene County versus the City of Bothell. What that number is, it's almost impossible to identify clearly because there are so many parameters that could put into a development. Maybe there's a wetland over here, maybe there's a big buffer here, maybe there's a steep hillside. It's really tough for us to say, yes, it's 15% or 20%, and then we just match our zoning to meet that. It's just really hard to come up with that. So essentially what we did, we said, okay, Keene County, R6, 7200 is their basic lot provision. We're going to assign a 7200 provision. And that worked pretty well for the most part within this area. In this case, what we've got is that some property owners are identified that may be an issue for them, and we need to do an analysis to find out actually what that is.
And I was thinking more of probably not downzoning so much, because I think that kind of might be perceived as being unfair to those property owners, but it just seems like it'd be better to have a more uniform distribution so you don't end up having a much lower density right adjacent to an existing City of Bothell zoning that was much higher, like a 9600 versus a 5400. It seems like if you've got 4 or 5 parcels that were annexed, and I know there are parcels that were annexed that are kind of islands within the City of Bothell, that some consideration be given to making those, I guess, closer to the surrounding zoning. And I guess my point would be, I'd like that to be, I guess, looked at as part of this review, if that's possible.
Yeah, and actually that's a really good point, because we do have a few of those, and fortunately not very many, but there are a few, and they're fairly easy to identify.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
I know, Bruce, that you said you had not had a chance to do the pros and cons analysis. I'd really like to see what that is, and making sure that we're treating these homeowners appropriately.
Right. And part of that pros and cons analysis includes a traffic impact. Let's say we do decide to upzone. Well, now all of a sudden we're going to have more dwelling units than the plan called for.
Right.
That may have some implications for our capacity of roadways. And so there's a lot of nuances there that we have to do, and that'll be one of the things that we want to provide to the Commission before you take any real serious action on these items.
Right. Thank you.
So I guess I would, just to sum that up, you have the direction from the Planning Commission to do further analysis of that particular parcel and come back to us with some recommendations, as well as further data as to whether it's R5400A or R4000A or perhaps some other designation, but we'd like to study it further.
Thank you very much. That helps a lot.
So before we leave that, are there any other questions on the Brickyard Road, Queensgate subarea in particular for Mr. Blackburn? I have one question, and I'll let the other commissioners think of, if they have their questions. So if you look at the map of that particular sub-area, Bruce, I see the RAC designation there in what would be, I guess, the southwest corner. It's that parcel right by I-405, RAC-NBOP. And kind of keeping with my comments actually about the Nike Hill parcel of what I'd like to see with Bothell in terms of more residential or more services disseminated throughout our city. If you look at the north end and you see those parcels designated GC, OP, LI, would there be a possibility of any of those also receiving the RAC designation? And if so, yes, or if not, why not?
Well, I think there is the possibility, because we've actually already identified this as a little neighborhood business area.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea would be that, hey, look, maybe it needs more than just a 2800 designate. Maybe it's a RAC or something like that. We can look at that as well.
And I don't know if that's my thoughts. I don't know if any of the other commissioners would be open to. I see heads nodding. So let's do further analysis on whether there might be a way we can encourage additional services being developed in that part of that sub-area. Are there any other questions for Mr. Blackburn on that sub-area? Seeing none, hearing none. Are there any members of the public that have comments or questions on the Queensgate, or Brickyard Road, Queensgate sub-area? Yes, sir. If you just approach the podium and again give us your name and address.
My name is Steve Nielsen. My address is 16025 124th Avenue Northeast, and that's in the city of Bothell. I still have a Woodinville post office. However.
Excuse me, Steve, your last name again?
Nielsen, Nielsen.
Great, thank you.
Our family's been there since 1978 or so. And this is in the area that was previously discussed at the intersection of 124th and 160th. I prepared some comments, so I don't ramble. I just read it to you. It's not too long. Includes some of the comments that were made in the in a letter that the staff had put in this document that you all have. This most southeasterly corner of the city of Bothell is at the confluence of traffic volumes resulting from the granting of land use entitlements by the city of Woodinville, the city of Kirkland, the city of Bothell, and King County. Already, traffic volumes on our two frontage roads, 124th and 160th Street, exceed those that would be considered reasonable for majority of residential neighborhoods in the city of Bothell, as well as the other jurisdictions in the close-by vicinity. In addition to things that have already gone on, currently there is a new subdivision under construction of 157 lots by the national home builder D.R. Horton just down the street from us on 124th. Approved by the city of Woodinville, and the plat is under development right now, adding 157 lots to this intersection. Had our underdeveloped parcels been included in the road plan for Totem Estates, which is the subdivision that lies on our north and west, which was developed over 40 years ago, we would be benefiting from a residential street pattern that provides protected internal traffic circulation and safer access to individual homes. As it now stands, access to our area can only come from arterial streets that converge at a high-volume signaled intersection right at our corner. A basic principle in land use planning is that when impacts from intense uses fall upon more passive uses, then those impacts should be addressed and mitigated in the development standards for the more intense use, in this case, the adjacent arterial streets. That is why landscaping, site screening, setback principles are applied in zoning standards and development approvals. The difficulty in use transition that comes when the aggregated traffic impacts from general community growth is directed towards a small land area such as ours without any consideration for mitigation of those impacts. It's too late to provide access to these parcels through totem estates. Access must be either from 124th or north 160th, or both. As is evident throughout urban and suburban growth patterns in residential areas, the issues surrounding land use transitions are often addressed through increased densities adjacent to the more intense commercial, office, or multifamily uses. In this case, increasing the density of development to the R4000 standards would offer needed design alternatives to effectively adapt to the ever-increasing traffic activity, while at the same time providing residential development alternatives. As you know, our area was recently annexed from King County to the City of Bothell. Following the completion of the annexation, the zoning on the property was changed from King County R8, 8 dwelling units per acre, to the City of Bothell zoning designation of R5400D. This significantly changed the planned residential density of these properties due to the difference in lot dimension requirements, net land area calculations, and other limitations and restrictions when comparing King County's R8 with the City of Bothell R5400D zone. The clear interest that the City of Bothell has in promoting the efficient use of land, we do not believe is reflected in the application of the 5400D or 5400A classifications on this property. Prior to annexation into the City of Bothell, a subdivision called Haley's Park was developed under King County R8 zoning on Northeast 160th Street, just to the west of us, a few hundred feet. The Haley's Park lots are 2,600 to 3,000 square feet in area and accommodate single-family detached homes in a location that has similar environmental impacts from external traffic volume and circulation influences. It was the site plan for the Haley's Park subdivision in the R8 zone that we believe is the best example of a plat design response to the impacts surrounding the property. And as an aside, on this photograph, it was included in your report. The Haley's Park subdivision is kind of over in this left side here. Is shown as R4000 on this map, but on your comprehensive plan, it's still showing as 5400. And
Should be 5,100, yeah.
I had a question about that. Another current example of progressive residential plat design in the City of Bothell is the Trellis Park subdivision on Brickyard Road, just north of our location. This is a single-family detached neighborhood with homes sold and others under construction in an R4000 zone. When a development parcel is impacted by unique external influences, the availability of plat design flexibility and dimensional standards, such as those found in the R4000 zone, can more effectively address the design issues. We would like to request your consideration of applying the R4000 standards to the development of our property. The land use decisions by King County, the City of Woodinville, the City of Kirkland, all very close neighbors, continue to funnel increasing traffic volumes through the intersection of the two arterials at our corner. The impacts are real, and some mitigation of those impacts can be achieved through progressive residential design solutions. The R4000 zoning standards provide much of the needed flexibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Just one question. I have to admit that when I was listening to the opening of your comments, I thought you were, again, be opposed to the R4000, but in hearing you out, and obviously your conclusion is that you would support a greater density level and smaller lot size in that particular parcel. Now, won't that create some additional traffic? But I just want to make sure I understand your thinking here.
My house, parts of my house are 90 years old, and it's ready for redevelopment. I raised my family there. My neighbors have parcels of land, 30,000 square feet each on these other parcels, and we're not going to continue to live there. The pressure is too much. In the morning, traffic can back up on 124th from 160th North down the hill probably a quarter of a mile. And there's more coming. And I understand the idea of that was mentioned earlier about taking land use designations and showing some consistency in that application of residential densities. But in this case, there were so many land use decisions and development rights granted, not just in King County where we were, but in Bothell, the 157 lots down the street, all of which direct impacts to our corner where we live, where our properties are. And there has been no mitigation of those impacts. And oddly enough, you can mitigate those impacts with, and it's common in urban development, to mitigate that with higher density residential zoning. I mean, it just is. I mean, R2800 would be an appropriate zoning adjacent to that level, when you're right on it, that level of arterial volumes.
Understood. Thank you very much. Any other questions of Mr. Nielsen?
For what it's worth, I live right in that area, so I have a lot of firsthand experience with the area and the traffic there. I have a similar question to Steve. I'm hearing two different things. So the traffic there gets pretty dense on 160th and 124th, but I'm having trouble connecting how increasing the density, that seems like it would make the traffic even worse. How will increasing the density help mitigate the traffic?
I don't think there's anything that can be done to reduce traffic volumes, whether it's 1 per acre or 12 or 18 per acre. The traffic volumes are going to continue. 157 lots just down the street. More businesses down in wine country. They all come up over this hill to get to 405. And there's access for thousands of acres, thousands of homes on hundreds of acres to get to a freeway as well. What I'm saying is that if our parcels had been included in the residential development of Totem Estates with internal access away from the arterial flows, then it would have been a different story. But we have 4 frontages on these 2 collector arterials, and it takes me a while to turn into my driveway. That's not going to change. I mean, so what we want is residential density that it gives us some flexibility to, and really it is just by the application of density, to adjust to those impacts. I mean, this is not a spot for the 7,200 square foot zoning that's next door. And Bruce has just tried to describe to me on a couple of times about how 5,400 would work. I don't quite grasp the A part and how that changes. But the one feature of the 4,000 zone that would help us in plat design is that it does not include the lot circle in a dimensional requirement. That's one of the things in the zone.
Okay, understood. Your concern is around more the mitigation and access to that parcel, whether it's R4000 or R5400. I think Mr. Nielsen sees that as it's not really going to impact the number of cars that much, but he would like the greater flexibility around mitigation. That's what I'm hearing. So.
My business is I build my son and I build homes in North Seattle on infill and redevelopment parcels, and people don't mind living in. They seem to be less impacted by traffic influences in the higher density locations, higher density residential living as opposed to living on an acre out on Hollywood Hill. I mean, it's different.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions for staff of, I'll open it up to all the sub-areas now. And let me just make a few, yes, and are there any other members of to continue the public opportunity to comment on this particular sub-area or any others? This is your chance to do that. Yeah, come forward, sir.
Hi, my name's Michael Hughes. I live at 8422 Northeast 190th Street. I'm one of those island people. I have one of those properties on 88th that it's brought into the city many years ago, but was surrounded by, on three sides, by, okay.
And just sorry to interrupt your stream of thought there, Mr. Hughes, but is that a particular sub-area? This is in West Hill?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you. Go ahead.
Hey, we got them. Doesn't work. So I have a property that 4.8 acres that is zone 9600, surrounded on three sides by 7200. The properties around me were recently brought in to the city of Bothell. Their zoning was R6 and now 7200. So that in the future, I plan to do some redevelopment in there. And the 9600, I'm asking for conforming zoning around me. I've got 7200 on north, west, and south, and 5400 to the east.
I'm having a little trouble. Can you point out, Bruce, for me exactly which parcel we're talking about? All right, thank you.
So that little island was brought into the city some years ago, and the properties around it recently came in. These were R6 and developed under R6 under King County.
Mm-hmm.
So their designation now has been brought in and clarified at 72. I'm at 96, and I'm asking for some consideration and would like to see mine rezoned at 72.
Yeah, I know exactly where that piece is now that it's pointed out to me. And let me just ask staff, is any background on why that when it came into the city was given the 9600? Can you give us any background on that at
Yeah,
all?
for many years, the city's default single-family residential designation was R9600. So basically, whenever there was an annexation, it was basically assigned an R9600 designation.
So it was more just default, and that was kind of a strategic direction of the city at the time?
It was, yes.
And that's, and you understand that that's, it was a nice thing for Bothell to have all these 9,600 square foot lots. It's a cool thing, but I understand your point in terms of
I've
being conforming
been to
to the
city council
surrounding
meetings
areas.
many times
Yeah.
and fought for clustered housing and this sort of thing. I'm a big believer of density from the standpoint that if we don't build it here, we're going to go all the way to the mountaintops. In 1965, there were 6,500 people in Bothell, and a house that I owned on 180th was not even in the city limits. So in 50 years, this is where we're at, and in 50 years, we're going to be a lot more people.
Sure. Any questions or comments from the commission? Commissioner Clark?
I just one clarification. Your property was part of the annexation, or it was adjacent
It
to
was
an area
not.
that was annexed? Okay, so it was not. So
It
the area that was
it
annexed
was voluntarily brought into the city at some point in the past.
Okay, so were there areas adjacent to this that were just annexed?
Yes.
Yes, yes,
And those are the R7200?
correct.
Correct.
So it's kind of almost the counter to what I was talking about is,
Yeah.
I guess my comment would be, we kind of formally provided the staff some direction as far as how to handle looking at some of these issues in more detail, and I think I didn't really hear it articulated that this is one of those issues that we'd like them to look at, and I would like to ask that we formally ask them to look at this issue of trying to, of at least considering the possibility of making the zoning more homogeneous, I guess.
Why don't you go ahead and put that into a motion?
Make a motion that staff look into the possibility of taking some of these islanded zones that were islanded as a result of either annexation or, well, I guess it is annexation, and look at the possibility of making those more, looking at the surrounding uses and zones and making those more, I guess,
Compatible.
conforming with those surrounding uses.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yep.
Before you go too far on that, I think what I'll do is probably notify people who have those islands and get some input from them before we actually hold the next meeting on this.
Yeah, and I guess it just goes without saying that for all of these recommendations on some changes that we must follow a very formal public notification process and allow for the right period of time for any other comments from the public. So we've actually looked at quite a number of different parcels inside of Bothell this evening, which is terrific. We should do that. But we do have to follow a very disciplined process, and I would fully expect staff to do that.
Thank you very much.
Can I add one thing to that? I think also that the direction is that we would look into it more. We're not making a specific recommendation about
Exactly.
how you might alter the code, but we're just asking, I think, for more information.
More information. Certainly come back with a recommendation, and we may accept or alter, but as part of your research, come back to us with a
Absolutely.
recommendation as well. Thank you. So let me just ask any other comments or questions from the public with regards to any of the sub-areas in question this evening? Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your comments. So turning now to the remainder of the material that Bruce presented to us, are there any other comments or questions for him on the material that we received? Commissioner Stahl, or excuse me, Stedman.
It looked like about 99% of it was merely cleaning up some of the verbiage and such. So
Yeah, exactly.
I had no problem at all
I
with
saw that as well. And so as I was going through it, I was pretty much checking off, okay. I didn't see major changes, but more, reflecting realities that have occurred, and you certainly have our support to go forward with that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I think we're ready at this point to move forward, and why don't at this point we put forth a motion to continue the public hearing on really all these elements. We're not closing any of them. So let me hear a motion to continue the public hearing.
Well, till which date?
Well, and that I was going to hold that till the end, but let's discuss that now. If I look at the calendar, we're talking about a meeting next week, the 22nd, but we are also talking about the 29th. So let's clarify both next week as well as the 29th for our meeting dates. And
Yeah, I think the expectation now is that you would not meet next week on the 22nd. That would, in terms of getting you a packet, that would only give us essentially tomorrow, or
Right.
actually tomorrow morning, to turn that around, which is difficult.
yeah,
So the next meeting we anticipated would be October 29th, when we'll bring these items back.
excellent. Okay, so let's put forth the motion to continue the public hearing on the 2015 public periodic plan to the 29th.
Motion to continue the public hearing on the 2015 periodic plan and code update to October 29th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. This evening, I don't believe we have a study session. Any old business? From a reports from staff point, I did see the hearing examiner report. Are there any staff comments with regards to that examiner report that you'd want us to highlight and discuss?
No, I think it's self-explanatory, and that's the only staff report we had.
Great. Any reports from members? The only comment that I had was I wanted to make sure we clarified our schedule and calendar for the next 2 weeks, which we've done. Commissioner Stahl will be leading the meeting on the 29th. I will not be here. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
We are adjourned.